Hey, welcome to Game Brigade. I'm Brian Greer. Today we're diving into OROS. This is a game that's currently on Kickstarter, just has a few days left, and I am so excited to talk about it because this game is probably one of my favorite games of 2021. So let's dive right in. Okay, I mentioned that OROS is one of my favorite games, and that is because this game is so mechanically tight and clean that you could tell there's been a lot of love and care put into the development of this game, and one that players can learn the rules of, but it's going to take players a long time to master. And I appreciate that in my games. And I don't want to necessarily call this a Euro game because I think there's a lot more going on, but it has some Euro elements. And so whenever I think of a Euro that's clean and good, I like to have it make sure that it's got those mechanics. So we have multiple things going on. Because of the complexity of this game, I'm not going to do a full rules rundown in terms of how to play. I'm going to try my best to explain the game in a manner that can make sense, and then we'll talk about the things I liked, the things I didn't like, and things I'd like to see more of. So right off the bat, we've got our main board up here. This is set up in the small board. It is a double-sided board, so you've got a large side and a small side. The small side also includes these these numbers and letters on the board. That is for the Automa, which I've set up an Automa player over here for reference. Along the edges of the world here, we've got different sizes of land masses, and then in the middle we have a very large landmass. And the icons in the middle, the numbers, represent how large this land space is or how many adjacent land tiles are on it. So for example, a 2 tile has 2 land sides, while a 3 has 3 different land sides, while a 4 is fully surrounded by land. And the idea of this game is we are going to be playing demigods represented by these guys over here on the ziggurat, and we're trying to gain the most knowledge using our followers to perform different types of tasks as we do that. And there are many different ways that we can gain knowledge in this game, and that's one of the things I like about it. One of the aspects of being able to choose the different type of path each game of what I want to run. Each one of these action paths down the bottom, we'll talk about how these work here shortly, all provide different types of XP depending on how we are going to level them up. The idea of this game is we are going to be shifting the tectonic plates of this planet, this globe space, crashing together different types of land masses, forming bigger and better places, eventually forming mountains where our followers can build temples, monoliths, and shrines to our demigods. So that is kind of the rough overview of what we're going to be doing. Let's talk about first down here the action player boards, because it's almost like a separate mini game. It's almost like 2 different games going on at once. So let's dive into the player board and discuss the anatomy of it. So here we have different types of action spaces that we can select, and we currently have 4 workers on the board. In this game, you are not able to select an action that is filled by a current worker. So that is one of the aspects that we need to constantly be thinking about, is if we're going to have a worker there, if we plan on taking that action later, we need to make sure that we can move that worker somewhere else. And we get 3 actions per turn. So to take an action, we take a worker and we're going to place it somewhere that is not been occupied by another worker, which will then free up the space they were on. So then I could take another worker and move there, and so on. We can do those 3 actions. They all do different things. We'll just kind of run through them real quick. We can shift all land tiles in a row. That's referring to this upper board, where we can shift in a row everything one direction or the other direction. In terms of rows and columns, they're all considered rows. And this piece of land is considered to be a circular global-like effect. So if something were to shift off the board, so if I were to shift towards me, and we shifted all these land tiles towards me, like so, this tile who came off the board will repopulate back on the other side, so that everything is circular and adjacent. You also have these arrows here for reminders if you were to shift. So if I was to shift, then these things this way, they're going to come around and go that way. If at any time you have two land pieces that are intertwining or connecting with each other, then they collide and you will form a new piece of territory. For example, this one right here, if we were to shift these over and this 1 collides with this 3, we'll remove both of these off and replace it with a new 4-piece tile. And these would then be over here like that. So that is an idea in terms of how a shift effect can form land masses. Or, sorry, that's not the shift form. That would be the move land spaces, and that would be the shifting of the 3 over. But the shifting in terms of that. The next action is the move land tiles 1 space, which is what I just showed you there. We're moving these 3 land tiles 1 space, which is what caused that collision there. We then have erupt or form volcanoes. You have volcanoes here on the map that you can either erupt from, which will create land space from that, so it'll grow the tile it's on. If this tile is already a 4, it'll then spill out and build more land spaces. Or you can form a volcano. You can then take a 3. See if we can find a 3 here. Do we have a 3? We should have a 3. Here's a 3. And I can place that on any tile that I choose so that later I can erupt those volcanoes. We have send 1 to study or return 2. Studying is a way that we gain wisdom, which is a way that we can level up some of these abilities, which we'll talk about here very shortly. We have journey followers. Journey followers is basically sending our followers on a journey to have them traverse across the land tiles. This is the only way that we can get our followers to move across the board to eventually build our shrines and our temples and our monoliths. To be built, for one of our temples to be built, we have to have a mountain tile piece, which is represented by one of these M's. We have to have a follower on it, and then we take the build 1 sacred site, which we then would move one of these tiles over to form the building, and then move our follower on top of it, because now he is on top of that shrine. It is important to note that only 1 player per mountain tile can build. So if I were to build another shrine, I could not build it on this tile because I already have one there. But other players can use my tile to build another one. For example, if the green player decided they wanted to build here, they could add their green shrine on top of my monolith. So that is how you eventually stack up to eventually get 2 temples. So if we had another player, which every game requires at least 3 players. So if you don't have enough players, there are automas that you can fill in for them to eventually get to that temple space. So the final one we have are the obviously build 1 sacred site, which we covered. Now, all of these are limited to the type of ability that they have down here in the bottom, but we can level those up and improve them, and that is by gaining wisdom. By gaining wisdom, so you can see here there are options of gaining wisdom by building our shrines, but we can also level them up. So for every 1 wisdom we collect, we can raise one of these caps up 1, and anything below it is now available to be unlocked and used. If you were to raise them all the way to the top, this is how you unlock these additional XP points, and as well as ascend points, where you can ascend your demigod up the ziggurat track. So this is a whole separate game of the worker placement, placing your workers in different spots, eventually trying to get XP to level up different types of tracks. Do you choose to go up monolith track, getting more XP per every monolith built, knowing that you can only have 3 built at a time? Or do you try to go up the skill trees, trying to be as diversified as possible? And if at some point you eventually unlock an entire horizon, as they say, one of these other workers will become available for you to use. Now, that is a plus and a minus. Normally in worker placement games, having more workers is more beneficial because it allows you to do more actions, more abilities. In OROS, it can actually be kind of a hindrance because you're causing more of a buildup in your player board section. Now, if you have some that are sent to study, And then you unlock these that can give you ability to do more actions and do more things, or send more people to the board to do more stuff. But if at any time you're having them all down here, it definitely causes a traffic jam, which is an interesting kind of push your luck kind of mechanic in terms of how much are you willing to risk to be able to get that kind of benefit. So other than that, players are going to be colliding into each other, building their mountains. Eventually, though, once a mountain is built, it shuts down some of the movement abilities. And those are indicated down here at the bottom of the row, where it has a mountain with a slash in it saying that you are not able to shift any row that has a mountain in it. For example, this whole row, because this mountain, is now locked, as well as this whole row. So in terms of building and moving, as the board starts to manipulate and become more jam-packed with different types of mountains, it kind of limits the type of abilities that you can do and the type of movements you can do, unless you level up to where you can shift mountains, and then everything opens up for you at that point. So that is the scope of the game. Now we do have over here what I said, the Automa. Sorry, the Automa is over here, and the Automa is very interesting because each of the 4 player boards in the game all have their own Automa, and they all have different personalities and how they play. Some of them are a little bit easier, some of them are a little bit more aggressive. It's up to you to find out which ones are good for you and how you like to play with them. And the Automa is very simple. They have a deck here that you will draw from, and you will flip it over, and it'll tell you what you're going to do. You have the actions, you have the tile references, and then any experience knowledge that the player will take for them. So this one is telling you the region. It's telling you in the C region, we want to build if it's possible. Unfortunately, there would be no way to build. If there's no options in terms of what it's able to do, if it's not possible, you then keep going down the track until you do what is possible. One of these will be possible. You just have to figure out which one it is. And then you're going to go down here and fulfill what it's telling you. And in terms of the shifting, it's always from the perspective of the player board of the Automa. So if I had the Automa next to me and I'm playing from over here, it's going to be from this perspective. But in this case, I have it over here, so it's going to have to be from this perspective. And then if there's a situation where the Automa is leveling up wisdom, because the Automa can also learn and get better, we reference the back of the sheet, which will tell us which of the corresponding tiles will gain experience. Very clean, very well thought out. I like how everything is pretty much already been thought up for you, and there's basically a rule for everything, so you don't have to have any kind of misguidance or any kind of things where you're going to have the wrong type of so like basically where you're not going to understand a rule. Everything's been pretty much well thought out. So that is the basis of the game. At some point, as players are moving up the ziggurat here, moving their way, you will get to a player at the top of the ziggurat, which will trigger the end of the game. And then players will count their points to see who has gotten the best, who is the best demigod in terms of gaining the most knowledge. These points do reference knowledge points, so obviously the only player at the top gets 15. But everything else that you've done up to that point is also worth points, depending on how many monoliths, shrines, temples, how high you went up in these tracks. All are worth additional points, which you can specialize and try to figure out different ways to win. It's really interesting in terms of all the different types of options. I personally have yet to win in this game, but every time I've played, the challenge and the puzzle is always fun to return to. So with that, let's talk about everything that I liked, if I haven't already talked about it already. So OROS is definitely a game that really kind of scratches the itch, I think, of that puzzle thinky game that also is developing in a way that's unique and not really done before. I love the way you're shifting the tiles. I like the way the tectonic plates are colliding into each other. You're changing the board, and it also affects how the game is going to be played. The aspect of the player board in terms of how things are going to be manipulated and how you choose to kind of build your character and how it affects the player board is really interesting. We had players who were trying to go all the way up the moose spaces so they can journey their followers and basically send them anywhere in the map. But a few times, because of the way other players are able to shift the board, shifting these tiles away, shifting things around, you kind of isolated sometimes villagers where they would be stuck because they're landlocked. Because villagers can only walk along paths that are connected by land tiles. For example, if you have, this is getting a little messy with me shifting everything, but if I have a follower over here on this 1 tile, I cannot send him to this 2 tile because there is water blocking his path. The tiles do not match. So being able to level up one thing might help you in terms of being able to run across the whole board. But if another player decides to go up a shifting tectonic plates or moving the mountains or whatever, you can affect other people's game board states as well, which creates a really dynamic and fun environment. I also really like the implementation of the volcanoes. They have these hotspots. I didn't really talk about them in the overview, which are basically, you know, they're vents of constantly flowing lava. If at any point this tile were to be moved and this were vacant, we're going to fill it with a free island space, which is constantly going to be giving us more tiles to be playing with. And then the volcanoes themselves, the way these work, if I were to erupt this 2 tile, I take 2 plus 1 and I will add a 3 to its space. But let's say we had a 4 here and I did the same thing. We would replace this one with a 4. I'm losing all over the place. Now I've got 3 more numbers I can go to, which means I can then replace this 3 with a 4, and then I could replace this 2 or this 1 with a 3. I believe that would work. And so basically by erupting that mountain, we are then sending lava flowing out from this space, building up additional land spaces. Now, this would be a good way to build up spaces quickly so that we can then collide to form mountains. Because remember, to form a mountain, we must collide 4 together. So that's one of the things I liked. I also liked, in terms of the ziggurat, the aspect of if you were to level up and your space is occupied by another demigod, you immediately will jump over them. So it creates an interesting little dynamic of not wanting to get too knowledgeable too fast because you don't want to give up free points to your opponent, but you also need to get on the track as quick as possible because you need to start getting up there to try to race to the top. It's a really interesting dynamic. I love that aspect of it. Really, really impressed with that. The final thing I really enjoyed about this one was the Automa system. There are a lot of times Automas are kind of boring. They're just there to kind of facilitate the ability for you to play the game sans a player. And this does do that. You know, it's obviously saying, hey, this is a game that needs at least 3 players. The developer knew that. And it's not always easy to get 3 players right now. So being able to have an Automa system that is unique and individualized is so cool. I liked how the blue demigod in the Automa was a lot more relaxed, didn't really affect the board too much, so it was good for us when we were new to try to learn how the game works before we moved on to the more dynamic ones where they are definitely doing a lot more movement, a lot more destruction, removing tiles from the board, just doing things that are just totally wild and give each one a kind of a personality of their own. Definitely cool. So with that, let's kind of talk about things that I didn't like. And this one is not going to be very long, if at all, because for the most part, I think every aspect of this game really hit home for me. There wasn't any moment in the game where I didn't enjoy myself or I didn't understand like what was happening. The only times that it got frustrating to me, and it's not really a fault of the game, it's just the way the game is made, is when we got to the midpoint and the center of the tile was beginning to get filled with different types of mountains and becoming more complex. It does get a bit analysis paralysis in terms of what can you do, because you get to a point you're like, everything's locked out. I don't feel like I can do anything to benefit myself, to move the game forward. And if you have chosen certain types of upgrade paths, I can see it where a player could feel like they were not as basically midway through the game, if you haven't done things well and the board is getting in a state that doesn't favor your level up paths, I can see how a player might feel like they are not in a position to be able to win the game. Now, I have found that even though I felt that way a few times, by changing my path or by focusing on a new route, which is totally doable by getting additional types of wisdom. I was able to dig myself out of it. Again, I haven't won yet, so who knows if it's possible to actually win by doing this. But I'm just saying I did eventually get to a point where I was able to get myself out of it. So with that, what would I like to see more of? The game is very clean and very tight, so I have a hard time recommending anything additional in terms of what I would like to see. I think everything that was presented here was done purposefully and intentionally. They have definitely taken ideas in terms of how tectonic plates work, how things are going to be implemented together, how the lava flows will not transfer over mountains because of gravity, the way the different types of tiles interact. Everything was very clean. The only thing I could say, if I were to, throw a dart at a board of a wish list, might be to have additional types of Automa that might do something else. But there's not a lot of options here. I mean, everything was so clean, and I don't want to reach for straws here trying to find things, because the game itself is so nice and so clean. I could almost say maybe different types of boards would have been interesting, but again, there's not much. The game is definitely top notch, very well thought of, definitely very impressed with everything I got. So with that, let's talk about my final thoughts and if I would recommend this game, because it's pretty obvious. I think this is one of those games that comes to Kickstarter once every 6 months or so, that is so well produced and well made that I would recommend this to anyone that is interested in a worker placement Euro style game. And take away the abstract part of the game, it is still such an interesting type of game that the abstract part of the tile movements is awesome, because it's not something that's most likely in your collection. It's a bonus on top of that. So I am giving this one of my seals of recommendation that I very rarely do for a Kickstarter, because this one has come with incredible production, great rule set, great mechanics in terms of how the game is played. It really feels like a complete game, even in this prototype form, which this is. It basically feels like it's ready for production, and I wouldn't change anything. So congratulations, guys, here at OROS. Definitely knocked it out of the park, for me at least. And I'm not a huge Euro player. I generally enjoy more random events, Ameritrash-like systems. So being able to play this game and just have as much fun as I did in terms of trying different strategies definitely means it really hit the park, the ball out of the park. So good job. Thank you, guys. Hopefully this review was helpful for you guys. Let me know in the comment section if this influenced your decision. I'd like to know. Leave a comment or hit the like button. If you're new to the channel and you want to, join the community, click the subscribe button and let me know that you're new. I'll talk to you guys very soon. Bye-bye.